I mean, I think the best dynamic is having a lot of powerful, figureheads in the building, having a lot of guys that have a lot of say and can impact and influence the way you build your roster. I am a believer, though. I think the GM should have more power than the head coach. I just don't think that a guy that has short-term priorities, that wants to win right now to frankly keep his job, but also just doesn't really care about value and the cost of players, just says my scheme needs X guy. It's not a winning recipe in my opinion. We've, of course, Andy Reid does a very good job of it. Obviously, I guess Bill Belichick, was kind of the GM there as well. But in my opinion, the general manager, because he has more of a long-term focus, he has more of an understanding of things outside of just X's and O's and stuff like that, not to, insult head coaches, but I think the general manager should have more power than the coach, and that is not the case in a lot of buildings.
You got your MAGA Mac guys, McMullen and McDonald here with you on Birds 365. We bring in a guy who's been on with us before, and he always gives us great insight when it comes to not only rankings and ratings of players as per Pro Football Focus, but also the cap details, which some of us have trouble understanding. He's got as good a grasp on it as anybody we know. Brad Spielberger from Pro Football Focus and overthecap.com jumps aboard with us here on Birds 365. How are you, Mr. Spielberg?
I'm doing well. How about you guys?
Getting all fired up about Nick Foles, Brad, which you follow the Bears quite a bit, but in Philadelphia, people are crazy for obvious reasons about Nick Foles, but there is a small minority that think Nick Foles is a superstar quarterback. It's the most amazing thing, and I don't think people outside the city limits realize, no matter how long it goes, no matter how many times he fails, no matter how many times you point out the guy's never started more than 11 games, people think he's the answer. It's amazing.
You build a statue for a guy, and I guess, folks can't get over that. But I can tell you, like you said, I've been following the Bears. Not that he was ever the most mobile guy, but the guy is truly a statue in the pocket at this point, as well as outside the stadium. He's probably not an answer for the backup quarterback position. Believe in Gardner.
And I was on your Twitter earlier. The Bears even mishandled Nick Foles going out the door. We're questioning the Eagles' handling of Nick Foles, even talking about potentially bringing back for a third run here in Philadelphia. The Bears actually held on to him past the date where they lost more cap room because they thought they could eventually trade him. Give us the details on that, as the parting of the way of Nick Foles in Chicago went about as well as the arrival of Nick Foles. Didn't really pay many dividends in the Windy City.
Yeah, I'm sure the Eagles had something to do with this. I'm guessing them and the Colts were probably kind of sniffing around and maybe making some calls. And so the Bears thought, if we hold on to it up to the draft, maybe we can go ahead and get a draft pick for Nick Foles. So what happened was, once the league year began in mid-March, he had a $4 million roster bonus that became earned. And once money is earned, you can't offset it. If he'd been cut before that, this deal with the Colts would have been offset against that guaranteed roster bonus. So they missed out on $1.5 million in a cap credit they would have returned back. I get the move and thinking you get a trade done, but I mean, look, there are two starting quarterbacks in Baker Mayfield and Jimmy Garoppolo still available. There are other, high caliber backup quarterbacks around. I'm just not sure why they thought, everyone knew they were going to cut him eventually. So I just don't think it was a good gamble to try to hold out for a future 7th round pick.
Well, let's move on from Nick for a little bit and go to James Bradberry, Brad, because typical Eagles signing, that first report, it's 1 year, a little over 7 million guaranteed, can earn up to 10 million. But we all knew before we saw it, there's going to be voidable years on the back end. And sure enough, there were voidable years on the back end, and Bradbury's got to have a cap charge of $2.278 million for 2022. I saw you tweet the Eagles lead the NFL with $435 million in total prorated dollars. Next highest is the Saints. Mickey Loomis kind of famous for spending with the credit card to $345 million. Kind of explain to the fans what that means.
Yeah, so when you any contract you can pay it out in different ways, and the Philadelphia Eagles and the New Orleans Saints are believers that we might as well push money into the future and effectively use the salary cap inflation to kind of eat those dollars. You know it's going to go up every year. Obviously, besides the year where it went down, but it's going to go up every year. So you might as well just, like you said, kind of use the credit card and let inflation essentially kind of devalue that dollar. It does also take an owner that is willing to spend a lot and be aggressive. And obviously, Jeffrey Lurie is one of those owners.
And they have done so fairly successfully. You mentioned the COVID year where the salary cap actually went backwards. Nobody was banking on that or saw that coming. So I wouldn't hold the Eagles or any team that was doing future business that way against them. None of us knew a pandemic was going to hit. But how far out on a limb are they? Everyone understands the theory of how you do it. You just did a good job of explaining it. But then you have to take into account, well, is the player going to get for those up toward those voidable year? How long a contract are we talking about? Is he still going to be on the roster? If you can keep him under contract and he's still contributing, well, it's not that bad. If a guy all of a sudden goes bad and isn't worthy of being on your team and you can't even carry him and you can help yourself in that given year by cutting him, you take a dead cap hit money down the road. That can be a pretty big one. The Eagles are in a position that this could come back to bite them with the way they do their business, right?
Yeah, it just tends to make things a little bit difficult on the margins. You obviously have these dead cap charges, even for a guy that you do keep. Fletcher Cox is going to have a dead cap charge and a salary cap charge for his actual contract this year because you got to get that new deal done. You can basically, if you extend a guy early enough, you can kind of keep those dead cap hits pushed out into the future. They did not get his deal done before his contract voided. So they had to kind of take that dead cap hit and then still bring him back. They're going to keep doing it forever. They're going to keep just charging the credit card. I will say too, when you have a quarterback making like $1.5 million a year, that kind of fixes everything. Not to be too reductive, but that's kind of the truth. But yeah, it just it makes it a bit harder to spend if you do. Let's say Hurts is great this year and they want to go all in next offseason. They can still spend. They obviously spent this offseason, but it just makes that a little bit more difficult.
Brad, as Jody said, nobody could have predicted the pandemic and the NFL salary cap going back for the first time. How much did that affect certain teams like the Eagles and Saints who do business the way they do business in the short term? And using that Fletcher Cox contract as an example, because you had that year where you had to take a haircut at certain points because, it wasn't going – the cap wasn't going to where people projected it to go originally.
Yeah,
how much did that affect certain contracts? Sorry.
No, yeah, like you said, and not a single team planned for that because why would they? What it does is the void year thing too is it's fine if you're doing it for younger players, but you look at guys like Brandon Brooks, now Darius Slay, who is still playing at a high level, but whenever he inevitably steps away, they're going to have some big cap charge for him. It just, once you're doing it on 30-plus-year-olds, you're basically guaranteeing that at some point in the future, there's going to be a couple $1 million allocated to a guy not on the roster. And so, again, it's not the kiss of death. You can get around it. It's just more about, like I said, if you, want to be aggressive in a certain offseason or want to spend a ton, you just got to keep doing it forever. And eventually, the credit card bill always comes due. And it just makes it so that you kind of are kind of always chasing this money down the road.
One guy whose credit card bill is going to come due at some point, and it's not his doing, it's the Eagles doing, even though the way it reported could make it look like or sound like, oh, what? Why would Jason retire and leave us with this major cap bill? They've been doing this with Jason Kelce for years, pushing off down the road how much they're going to have to pay. He signed again this year, another contract extend, another year added on. At some point, Jason Kelce's going to stop playing football. And Eagles did well in potentially replacing him with their second-round draft pick this year. But how are they going to be able to afford the bill, which is going to come due when Jason Kelce no longer is wearing an Eagle uniform?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have like an $8-9 million cap charge, when he's not there. And so you got to hit on draft picks. Like I said, having Jalen Hurts working out is a massive benefit that if that went the other way, that maybe they're scrambling at that point. And that's kind of the one scenario. Let's say they were trying to get a veteran quarterback in that market because they didn't have a high draft pick. It makes that contract more difficult. You mentioned the cap drop. Maybe they don't get rid of all those players, move on from Carson Wentz probably still happens, but maybe just like you said, kind of a roster purge, kind of start over there. And they made the playoffs last year. I think a lot of folks thought they were going to be really bad last year. So credit to them for kind of knowing their roster better. They did go, 1-7 against or against winning record teams and kind of snuck in there. But I do think they outperformed expectations. But yeah, it just, not to be repetitive, but it's just, at a certain point, you're going to be spending money and going after free agents. And the only way you can afford that is if you keep pushing contracts down the road on the guys currently on the roster. And it just, it just makes spending a complicated process.
It's interesting because in Philadelphia, Brad, Howie Roseman has the reputation of being a salary cap, wizard, expert, whatever you want to call it. And he's got help with Jake Rosenberg and Bryce Johnston. They're really good, it seems, and maybe you can speak about this better than me, finding sort of loopholes in the CBA. They seem to be ahead of the game. So address that first, but also if I'm an owner and I'm going to hire Brad Spielberger and you're going to be my cap guy, what are you going to advocate to me? Would you advocate the Howie Roseman method, the voidable years method? Not to be reductive, as you said it's far more complicated, or being more disciplined, not spending on the credit card. Which way do you think is the better way to go?
Yeah, so first they're kind of in a league of their own. You mentioned loopholes. There were 2 or 3 things they were doing a lot of that in this new CBA in 2020, the league basically closed those loopholes, and you can kind of point back directly to Philadelphia Eagles contracts as a reason why that happened. So they are scouring the CBA, finding.
Brad, hold on. You got to explain that. What
so
was
I guess one
it
example
that the Eagles
would be,
were doing that the league felt they needed to change the rules because the Eagles were taking too much of an advantage of it?
So I'll give you one example. So with compensatory draft picks, where obviously you lose free agents, you gain free agents, and kind of your net, benefit there, you can earn picks, whatever. So there was a previous rule where if you had an option year on a contract and you declined that option, that player was still qualified to be a compensatory free agent. It was different than a cut, where if you cut a guy, he does not count in the calculation for you. But if you decline an option, which is basically the same thing, he would still count. And so the Eagles, of course, then just started putting option years that they were never going to exercise at the tail end of a bunch of contracts. I mean, maybe they could exercise it, but more likely not. And it effectively just made these guys compensatory eligible. Now a declined option on a contract is considered a cut, as opposed to considered a natural expiration of a deal. And so you can no longer do that. So that's one example. There were other teams that did it, but they did it, I think, more than anyone else. So yeah, like stuff like that. They're always kind of exploring different ways to kind of maneuver around the cap. So yeah, I asked the question of how I would go about it. It really is owner dependent. Like if you went to the Raiders, the Chargers, the Bengals, whatever, and said, hey, I want to be the Eagles, he would say, I can't afford that. I'm not capable of doing, what the Eagles are doing. So I guess one example I like to point to is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They used to put 0 signing bonuses and no prorated money in any contract except for rookie deals where it's required. But like Mike Evans becomes the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL, has a $0 signing bonus because that's just not how they did business. And why it benefited them in the long run is once they went ahead and got Tom Brady, now they're prorating everything and they have so much cap flexibility, so much willingness and ability to spend in the short term. And yes, they'll have some dead money as down the road, but it kind of, there's always this stat. They were the first team ever to return all 22 starters to their Super Bowl roster. That was because they used to never push cap down the road. And then now they flipped to the opposite. They're actually, I think, like the top 10 of most prorated dollars. But so I would try to be a little bit more balanced, a little bit more on pay as you go year to year, and then kind of maybe chase a window if you think you have a really good team and want to spend around them. Then you push a bunch of money down the road. With the Eagles and the Saints as well. Like if you have Drew Brees, if you have, a Carson Wentz that you believe in, you should be doing that. Like, why not? Who cares about cap health when you have a Super Bowl caliber roster? The difference, in my opinion, is when, you have Jameis Winston in New Orleans or, Jalen Hurts, who I do think is getting better every year, and you're still doing that. You shouldn't need to be pushing money down the road with a very cheap rookie contract quarterback.
That's a good read, I think, on not only the Eagles, but the National Football League in general. Let me then ask you this. You're sources around the league you call when deals are done and how they structure and do things like that. There's a big story in Philadelphia this week that Howie Roseman may have a bigger power base than he's ever had before. The success they've had, the moves that he's made, Jeff Lurie may be taking a step back. How big a difference is it from team to team? Their power base, their power structure. The salary cap is a big part of roster building with all 32 teams. Do most teams just leave it at the foot of the general manager? He's always got to get the okay from ownership. You got to give Jeff Lurie a nod because, yes, he's willing to write these big checks so they can take finances down the road. What is the most common way that most people structure, or the best way that people structure their power bases in the NFL as per the way you've been dealing with teams the last several years?
It's very different club to club. I mean, we're not even mentioning there are some head coaches that are the number one guy in the building, and obviously they're not, structuring contracts, but they basically say, hey, GM, hey, cap guy, I want this guy signed. I don't care what his price tag is. Go figure it out. And I don't think that's ever been the situation in Philadelphia. I know Eagles fans are not the biggest Howie Roseman fans. And look, at the end of the day, regardless of your structure, you have to hit on draft picks. That is the only way you can be a successful team in this league is being a good drafting club. And there is randomness and kind of luck to that operation. But yeah, I mean, I think the best dynamic is having a lot of powerful, figureheads in the building, having a lot of guys that have a lot of say and can impact and influence the way you build your roster. I am a believer, though. I think the GM should have more power than the head coach. I just don't think that a guy that has short-term priorities, that wants to win right now to frankly keep his job, but also just doesn't really care about value and the cost of players, just says my scheme needs X guy. It's not a winning recipe in my opinion. We've, of course, Andy Reid does a very good job of it. Obviously, I guess Bill Belichick, was kind of the GM there as well. But in my opinion, the general manager, because he has more of a long-term focus, he has more of an understanding of things outside of just X's and O's and stuff like that, not to, insult head coaches, but I think the general manager should have more power than the coach, and that is not the case in a lot of buildings.
There's been a lot of new blood with GMs in the NFL. Andrew Berry, is one we got close to here in Philadelphia. But this year, yes, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in Minnesota, you have Brian Poles in Chicago, on and on and on with the new GMs. Kind of early, so I don't know if you can answer this yet, Brad, but have you noticed a difference with sort of the new breed when it comes to contracts and salary caps? Obviously, we see it with player evaluation, but do you see any sort of new age thinking when it comes to contracts and the cap and things like that?
Yeah, I think it all ties back into just kind of the landscape of where we're at as a league, in that, you mentioned Ryan Poles in Chicago, comes in, one of his first moves is trading away Khalil Mack to the Chargers. I think every team, and it trickles down to the GMs, especially these younger guys, is more honest with themselves about where they're at, are no longer kind of chasing mediocrity and trying to go 500 and sneak in the playoffs, and would rather be bad, pick high, and then hopefully be a contender soon, as opposed to just trying to grind out a bunch of 500 seasons and maybe get lucky. And I think we've kind of seen that across the board. Is these new GMs coming in and saying, like, we're not the old guard. We're not going to kind of say all the rah-rah, taglines and stuff that people say. Like, we're going to be really honest with where we're at, and we're going to be bad in hopes of being good faster, and being really good, not just average. And I think we've seen that with a lot of these new guys. Yeah, you mentioned there's 9 new GMs this offseason. So obviously still early. Half of them, I think, came from the Philadelphia Eagles front office. But yeah, I think it's really just kind of a league-wide trend of just, a different approach to roster construction, where being in purgatory, the worst pick in the NFL draft is the 16th overall pick. Like, that is the worst place you can be, in my opinion. You'd rather pick first or pick 32nd, obviously. But I think there's more, honesty with that assessment.
I think the Eagles were supposed to pick 16th at one point. Howie Roseman moved around a couple times. I don't think they did. They moved up to get Jordan Davis, but that's funny the way that you stated. I understand the point you're trying to make. All right. Do want to get your read on what's coming next in the National Football League. This offseason, we saw the added value to the top of the wide receiver market. You saw 3 wide receivers get traded, not even free agents, get traded, but negotiate new contracts and take the average annual value to limits that we've never seen before, in excess of 25 million per. That's quarterback money. That's something we've never seen from wide receivers. So this year, the wide receivers became quarterback light in salary structures. We'll find out exactly how high is high when next year's franchise tag numbers come out and wide receivers are going to make a jump like we haven't seen before. What's the next position that happens to? It's always been about the quarterbacks. Defensive ends got a lot of money, I would say. Number 2, wide receivers probably moved into the number 3 spot. Is there another position that you think is on the cusp of making a big jump and you have to reevaluate what did the creme de la creme get paid at that position?
Yeah, I think a lot of agents make the argument basically when the position that their client plays opposite of starts getting a ton of money, they say, well, look, my guy is defending that guy. I'm obviously talking about cornerbacks right now. They say, well, my guy has to go up against that guy, and if he's worth $30 million now, then my guy should be worth, whatever. So Jair Alexander with the Green Bay Packers did just become the highest paid cornerback in the NFL at $21 million per year, but barely raises Jalen Ramsey's $20 million per year, signed 2 years ago now. I still think that position needs a true market reset. It takes a good talent coming along. I think maybe AJ Terrell in Atlanta after this upcoming season maybe tries to actually push it to like $24-25 million per year. There is concerns with kind of volatility of that position. They fall off earlier in their career from an age standpoint. There's more year-to-year variance in their play. It's harder to be a consistently elite corner, whereas a wide receiver, you can kind of be great year in and year out. So that impacts it a bit. But yeah, I think cornerback still needs kind of a true market reset.
What doesn't need a market reset, as Jody mentioned, is quarterback. And while 25 million used to be quarterback money, it's not quarterback money now. We were talking about Jalen Hurts, Brad. It's coming. It's coming quickly. And you kind of mentioned it in a draft standpoint. Worst place you want to be is 16 of 32, right? What if you have the 16th best quarterback of 32? Maybe 13, 14, maybe a little bit above that. Good player, takes you to the playoffs, one and done, Pro Bowl alternate, time for an extension. That basically starts at 30 million if you're getting lucky. Would you rather just turn it over? Do you see the NFL shifting directions and saying, okay, we can't pay that type of quarterback that much money and build a winner. So let's just turn this thing around every 4 years, become sort of like a college mindset that we have to reload every couple years.
I do think this is a trend that we're starting to see already now, where instead of kind of paying the Kirk Cousins, the Derek Carrs of the world, we're seeing, with Baker Mayfield and some of these teams saying, look, if he's not a bona fide top 8 guy, let's just go back to the draft or, make a trade and go after one of those guys. Paying that second tier of quarterback still, like you said, $30+ million. It's tough to kind of build a competitive roster around a guy that cannot elevate the talent around him. It's something we're seeing. And I do think of all the clubs that are going to, could handle this well, the Philadelphia Eagles are at the top of that list where, look, if he does not take a step this year as a passer and is not a clearly elevating the talent around him type of guy against good defenses, against good football teams, I don't think they're going to be afraid to say, look, we'll pay you, and this is another kind of potential value, say, look, we'll pay you $25 million a year, which is now half of the top of the market like Aaron Rodgers. Hurts probably has no interest in taking that and probably shouldn't, frankly, because someone else will pay him. But that I do think is this next trend we're going to see where they'll say, all right, fine, we'll go sign Ryan Fitzpatrick for a 1-year, $10 million deal. We'll draft the kid and we'll figure it out. Those middle tier guys, there's just been so many unsuccess stories. Not to be mean to Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr, but those come to mind.
Yeah,
I think that is the big trend we're seeing now. Is in the past, if a guy was good enough or was a clear starter, he would just get paid, and I do not think that's going to continue to happen.
Very interesting. We'll see if Hurts falls into that category or not. You need to educate me here, because I think I've got a pretty good grasp on the cap. Not like you, don't understand everything, but I get the generalities of it. Baker Mayfield is scheduled to make the money he's supposed to make this year. Last year it was rookie deal. The Browns have certainly shopped him. Nothing has come of it. Teams are holding out. Either they don't want to give up the draft capital the Browns are asking for, and or they want the Browns to pay some of his salary this year. How does that work? We can figure it out in just general dollars. You agree to pay whatever percentage of the contract when you send them, then you got to pay that percentage of the contract. How does that work against the cap? How big a cost is it for the team that's moving the guy if you're not just moving the entire contract with salary attached, but are agreeing to pay part of the salary? How does that all work?
Yeah, so what you have to do is convert some of that salary into a signing bonus because that way it stays on your salary cap. Salary itself always transfers in a trade, but signing bonuses stay with the original team. So they would basically say, all right, we'll turn half of that $19 million into a signing bonus. We'll pay that out. We saw it with Ryan Tannehill when he got moved to the Tennessee Titans, and then we'll send him over and we'll kind of keep that on our cap. So the Baker Mayfield situation, I actually had to be corrected on this. The interesting thing there is, we talked about offsets already. There are not offsets on his fifth-year option. And what that means for Baker Mayfield is whatever he earns elsewhere will be in addition to what the Browns have to pay him if hypothetically they cut him or something like that. So
double dipping. Love it. Love it.
Right. Exactly. The double dip. So,
Yeah.
in the beginning, I thought because he had offsets on his rookie deal, I thought that would transfer to his fifth-year option because technically it's the same contract. And therefore, he would agree to go to some team, make a minimum salary because no one was going to pay him more than $19 million and kind of say, let the Browns pay me as much as they want because I hate them and, I want them to have this big budget. So this big burden. So that's not the case. And so that's also one reason I think it's maybe taking too long is Baker might be saying, look, I'm not coming to you for cheap. I want a 1 year, $10 million flyer on top of what Cleveland owes me, the $19 million. So that is, I think, one kind of interesting wrinkle to all this as well.
He is Brad Spielberger. Follow him on Twitter at PFF_Brad, salary cap analyst, Pro Football Focus, overthecap.com. Nobody does salary cap stuff better than Brad. I'll leave you with Kyler Murray, Brad, as my final question. One thing the owners did really the past two CBAs is they closed up a lot of loopholes when it came to potential holdouts. There's not much players can do. But yet we're in the player empowerment era in the fact that guys have not only forced themselves out of certain situations, but gotten to where they wanted to go by other means. Kyler Murray's not going to show up for voluntary work, which is, not normal for a quarterback, especially. But that's one of the things he has in his pocket. What can he do, really, if Arizona just wants to play hardball?
So this is a fun one. So what they changed in the CBA is that if he does not show up for training camp, what happens is he would not accrue a season. So he would only have 3 years accrued seasons, which would make him a restricted free agent, which is interesting because if you're a running back or, a less important position, that's kind of the kiss of death because the team would probably tag you even at a first round tender. No other team's probably going to trade a first round pick just to pay you top of market. The interesting thing is that the players could actually, at quarterback in particular, could actually weaponize that against them because let's say Kyler Murray does not show up. Let's say he misses the entire season. The Cardinals can't just give him a first-round RFA tender because a team would do that, right? They would say, all right, we're going to sign Kyler Murray to an offer sheet. We'll trade you one first-round pick for Kyler Murray. So it's funny that it actually kind of goes the other way where they would have to franchise tag him in that season, and he basically kind of just skips ahead to a franchise tag well before he was actually, scheduled to get a franchise tag. So it does hurt players holding out. It definitely, hurts a lot of positions, but it kind of in a funny way, it can be weaponized by the premier positions that know a club would trade one first round pick for him.
Murray is a exceptional situation. Similar question, different situation. Aaron Donald. The Rams win the Super Bowl last year. On the field, he's even talking about retirement. The media member decided to take him there, but he did talking about it after, before, after, all around the game while celebrating the Super Bowl. He still is planning on playing this year, but he wants his contract redone, as do most players, and a guy of his magnitude and status should get his contract redone. So the Rams in here talking about it. He's not showing up at the offseason activities as of right now. But as John pointed out, if you don't show up, there are no forgiving of fines. You can say, well, when you come in, we'll waive all those fines. Can't do that anymore. What happens if they don't come to a contract agreement and we're into preseason for Aaron Donald with the Rams? Do you think he revisits that whole I can walk away as a champion stance?
Yeah, it's actually funny you mentioned the fines, because when he held out the first time, they forgave all the fines and paid him all that money, but they can't do that anymore. Although you could just kind of fold it into the contract. But yeah, I mean, I actually do think it is a legitimate threat. I mean, the guy is a first ballot Hall of Famer, got his ring, could keep his body healthy and probably live a happier rest of his life, even though, it'd probably be tough to leave that much talent on the field and know, excuse me, you're still the best player at your position. Look, he signed a deal for $22.5 million in 2018. That is still the biggest money ever given to the position 5 years later. So I think he wants and deserves a true market-changing deal, and frankly is looking out for other players as much as he's looking out for himself. I think the Rams, they just have to get it done. But yeah, if they don't, I actually do think, I didn't believe Rodgers when he said he was going to retire. I didn't believe, a lot of players. I actually could see him just walking off into the sunset and saying, all right, fine, it was a good career.
That would be wild if they do that, because he is still the number one player. Usually when guys walk away, they're not the number one player at their position at that time. Could be the case with Aaron Donald. Brad, great stuff. Always appreciate it when you come on. You absolutely educate both John and I whenever you join us. Thanks for doing so today. We'll get you on again before the season gets underway. Thanks for doing it with us today.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.